Um, Thanks for joining us for this online workshop on creating branded content. My name is Kayla Perry and I work with CWA Canada. And if you're joining us from outside the union, welcome to your first webinar. Before we begin, I'll share a little bit about how this webinar was made possible. CWA Canada is Canada's oldest media union with roots going back to the 1800s. We represent workers in the communications industry from news services to print, digital, radio, television, and mailing operations. This workshop was organized by a part of CWA Canada called the CMG Freelance branch, which is a voluntary dues-paying union membership for working Canadian freelancers. It was also organized by a division of CWA Canada called the Associate Membership, which offers a free union membership for students, volunteers, and precarious media workers. This is the fifth workshop in our online series this year that has included sessions on pitching, freelance finance, identifying viral content, and more. And as a CMG freelance member, you can access the recordings through logging onto the website. And as an associate member, you can access the recordings through a link in your e-newsletter that comes out monthly. So before we begin, I'll just introduce Matthew. Our speaker today is Matthew Manuge. He was recently named one of Marketing Magazine's top 30 under 30. He's currently the Associate Creative Director at Blue Ant Media's Solutions Group in Toronto, leading successful creative campaigns for clients such as Canon, Axe, Samsung, Home Hardware, Ford, and more. Before his career in content marketing, Matthew worked in film and television on several feature films and documentaries, as well as producing and directing a 13-part television comedy series titled Freeloading. So welcome, Matthew. We'll just bring your video back on, and you can take it away.
Hey, here I am. All right. Cool. Well, thank you so much for the intro, and thanks, guys, for joining us. Yeah, so I'm here to talk a little bit about my experience with regards to working for brands and branded storytelling. And it's kind of an exciting time for you guys as freelancers, whether you're a podcaster or a screenwriter or a filmmaker or musician or so on and so forth. It's really exciting because brands need content right now. Gone are the days of a 30-second TV commercial being able to support a brand for 6 months to better part of the year. Now brands more and more are looking for content to support their Facebook and Instagram pages, their YouTube, and every brand wants to just kind of push out as much as possible. So for you guys as content creators, it's a really exciting time because there's going to be more and more opportunities to actually work on branded stories and using your expertise to help bring the brand story to life. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the learnings that I've had in my career as a creative director, working essentially for a brand studio. And so we're going to go through a couple of the kind of do's and don'ts. I say it's the 7 things that I've learned over my career working on branded stories. But before we get into that, I just want to tell you a little bit about me and how I got into the role that I'm in. And it kind of starts with the old phrase that, everyone has a story to tell. And I truly believe that. And I think as artists, you guys all have stories that you want to get out and express your emotions. And brands have stories to tell as well. But, I was much more focused on my own stories growing up. So pictured here on the left is one of my best friends, Evan Cooper, and he's a screenwriter in California. And then on the right is a younger version of me. And Evan and I in high school, we used to make videos together. Every weekend we would get together and we would make, viral videos and sketches and spoofs and music videos and dramas. And we would kind of just take on everything that we wanted to do. And it was a very liberating time in our career because not only were we learning at a very young age, but creatively we had no restrictions. Our only restrictions were, budget and time more than anything. And so it was a great time for us because we were able to do exactly what we want and not feel like we had to answer to anybody. And so Evan ended up moving to New York and then to later to Los Angeles to pursue acting, and now he's a screenwriter in LA. And then I moved to Toronto. I'm originally from Muskoka, a very small town called Bracebridge. And I moved to Toronto to learn a little bit about film and television production. And from there, I worked a lot freelance. I worked on motion pictures and documentaries and TV shows and so on and so forth. And Evan and I, we actually met back up and were able to collaborate on a TV show called Freeloading. And it was kind of the Canadian version of Tosh.0. It was a guy in front of a green screen making fun of viral videos. And that's why it was kind of called freeloading, because we were the freeloading Canadians, stealing, the concepts from the Americans, and we were also freeloading content off the internet, viral videos, and poking fun at them. But when we were able to make that show, it was a very low budget show, and it was very rough around the edges, and it had moments where it was terrible and moments where, it was kind of funny and moments where it was very juvenile. But within that, we were kind of our own creative bosses. Yes, we had a producer or two that we had to answer to every now and then, but we didn't really have too many restrictions or creative limitations. So, when I, throughout my early part of my career, I pretty much was at the point where I could kind of do what I wanted to do. Maybe not make that much money, but creatively I was happy and I was the boss. And so the thought of working on branded content wasn't really one for me at first, because I thought when you work for branded content, you kind of sell your soul to the devil. I thought you're creatively selling out to make money. And it wasn't until when I started working on branded content a little bit that I started to realize that, it's not always that image of selling out, and that branded content can be something that can really fulfill creatively your passions, and can give you the tools to do things that you wouldn't normally have. And so I kind of got my feet wet a little bit. I was working for Blue Ant Media, which is this multimedia company here in Toronto, and with international arms. And I was working for different departments, but I started to get my feet wet a little bit in branded content for our brand studio team, which is known currently as Media Solutions. And I started to really enjoy the work. And I found out that when you're working for branded work, you're able to collaborate and problem solve for brands. You're able to work with certain people that otherwise you wouldn't have been able to do. You're able to work on different things at multiple times. And truthfully, working on branded work is going to fund things that you want to do. If I compare the budget I had for a 13-part TV series where I had final say versus the budget I work for on a campaign for X brand, it's night and day. So the moral of the story, for the most part, is to not necessarily think of working for branded work as selling out or anything like that. It really is a great opportunity for you guys as freelancers to be able to try new things, to problem solve within a box essentially, and then to be able to have money to work on things. The budgets on branded stuff sometimes can be nice, or the fact that it's just there to begin with. So in my role as a creative director for Blue Ant Media, I do all these things. I ideate and collaborate. I write and I pitch. I oversee. I direct. I just generally be creative. And in my role, I've actually been able to work on a lot of really cool campaigns. Everything from the Axe Self-Maker campaign that was in market last summer. I've worked on really cool things with Canon and with Honda and Unilever. We did a great series of videos about an interaction that Coors Light did where they had a rooftop party, and the only way to get there was to climb a rock wall. We've done a lot of really cool things over that time period. And not everything I've done have I particularly enjoyed. You're going to work on some things where, you might lose your hair. For me, I didn't have any hair to begin with, so it's totally fine. But there's going to be times where, you're not 100% liking what you're doing, but you're going to have those projects that you absolutely love. And so with that said, I'm here to talk a little bit about the 7 things I've learned working for brands. And regardless of what your role is, whether you're a writer or a filmmaker or camera or graphics or so on and so forth, I'm hoping that these kind of 7 tips are going to allow you to work them into whatever your role is within that. Some of this might seem pretty common sense, to be honest, and some of it might seem like a refresher more for you guys, but I'm hoping that there's some tidbits in here that you guys can take away. So number 1 on the list is to truly understand your client. And it might seem pretty obvious of knowing who they are and who they aren't, but there does come a time when it's hard distinguishing your personal preferences of what you like and what your client will like. And so understanding your client is really understanding, who they are at the core and who is their audience. And ultimately, that's going to come into, what is their positioning? What is their tone? What do they sound like, feel like? If you're working in, the graphic phase or editing, you might want to ask for, their brand guide. Most big brands have a guide that will tell you can do this with the logo, you can't do that. Here's our fonts, here's our colors, here's what our people look like, here's what our music sounds like. Always ask for that. And it's important that, to look at the work that they've done in the past, not to necessarily try to do status quo and copy what they've done in the past, but it's a good indicator in terms of what they've done and what they like. And you can also use that to kind of see their realm and hopefully push them into expanding their borders. And if you're working with a client who is maybe new to this and don't have a brand guideline or don't necessarily have done work in the past, ask them what they like. Don't just assume or presume what you think they're going to like. Sometimes it's as simple as, saying, here's a couple pieces in market right now from other competitors. What do you like and dislike about them? Or what have you seen out there in the market that you want to do? And to my point from before of truly understanding your client, you really do have to recognize that it might not always be your taste. It might not always be trendy and cool and like you necessarily want to work on, but you can find good elements in that. So pictured on the left there is a screen grab from a campaign we did last summer with Home Hardware. And they were a client where, very early on, we tried pushing them past their boundaries. We tried saying, you guys should do something that's a little bit more out there. And, as it went further along in the funnel, it became, okay, they're very comfortable in this one space, and we were able to make the best of it. And the videos weren't my cup of tea, but for them, they were exactly what they wanted. They were perfect, and they suited their needs. Which kind of goes with the analogy of that the best DJs never plays the music he or she likes. If I was going to be, the DJ at, my upcoming wedding, I would be playing music that no one had probably have ever heard of and nobody could dance to. The best DJs are the ones who play music that is top 40 and through the generations and all the hits. And sometimes that needs to be your role as a content creator when you're working for a brand is, to play to what the client will want. But that doesn't necessarily mean always getting into what the client wants. They're also going to lean on you for your expertise on what you think is going to be best to go in the market. So it's always still important to kind of push them outside their comfort zone, but just know that you can't go crazy with that. Number 2, and I think this is probably the most important thing, at least for me on the list, is don't work without a detailed RFP. So an RFP is called a request for proposal. It could also just be a creative brief, depending on how far along the funnel you're at. So the brief is meant to tell you everything you need to know. So for the brand, it's kind of the who, what, where, when, why. So what is their problem to solve? Why are they making the content that they're making, and what's the objective of it? Oftentimes, what you're going to be working on, and a lot of times what I'm working on is a piece of a bigger puzzle. So it's understanding what the overall strategy is and what the overall creative might be for the brand. I think thought starters is very important as well, is understanding kind of what they want to begin with. If you're told that, you want to do a video for Doritos and that's it, you can go in a million different directions. You can say, we're going to do an influencer campaign, or we're going to do a music video, or we're going to do comedy, or, it's going to be centered around cheesy humor because they're cheesy chips. Most likely, you're probably not going to win with that because, the client hasn't given you a direction of at least where they want to go in. So always getting any type of thought starters is going to be quite important to guide you to the right direction. Also understanding, to that point from before, is understanding their audience, and not just their audience, we're going after adults 18 to 35. It's okay, who within that, what's their income? What's, are they Torontonians? Are they hipsters? Are they rural? What's the psyche of the audience? It might sound pretty obvious, but understanding timing, and not just timing of when you're hoping to shoot it and when it's going to go, when you need to have it done by, but how long it's going to live in market for. If a client comes to you and wants you to do a video that's going to live for the next year, or they want a series of videos that are going to be in market for the next year, well, you can't film it entirely all outside and have a sunny beach scene if it's going to be Christmas time and they're going to be running something that doesn't look the same as what it is in currently right now in the weather. And it's the same for when you're shooting. It's going to allow you to problem solve and to figure out how you can actually pull off what you need to pull off. We were working on a series of videos in January that needed to go in market around this time, actually. And it needed to be 100% shot outside, and it couldn't look like winter. So we had to be very creative in terms of how do we shoot in Ontario in January, and it needs to be outside, and it can't have snow on the ground or look cold. So you really need to problem solve at that point in time and figure it out. But understanding that will help you get there. Also, having an understanding of your budget is really important. I know you might deal with a lot of people who say, you tell me how much it's going to cost. And I would say, don't necessarily ever downplay yourself, be as flexible as you can. If a client isn't willing to give you an idea of the budget and come up with something that's scalable, something that can be done on the cheap or could be blown out as big as they want, and make that known to them. But, it's always good to push back and say, realistically, how much are you willing to spend? And then last but not least is KPI. So KPI is the key performance indicator, and that's success. What does success look like to the client? And I'm going to go in a little bit more on detail in that in just a second. But really, all of this is to say, never work without a brief. Never work with a blank slate, because your mind can go in a million different directions, and it's never going to align with what the client wants. As a writer, you don't sit down with Microsoft Word, a blank page, and have no idea of what you want to write or the genre of it, or whether it's a poem or a story or whatnot. It doesn't happen like that. Creative, I find, doesn't really come from an aha moment. It comes from working within parameters, and your parameters are your creative brief. Which brings to just a really quick little story about David Byrne. So David Byrne was the lead singer of the Talking Heads, and he's a musician and artist, and I've always been a huge fan of his. He's kind of like my creative guru that I look up to. And if you're not familiar with his work, definitely check it out. But in the 70s and 80s, the Talking Heads were known for being very revolutionary. They came up in New York in the CBGB era, and they did music that didn't sound like anything else at that time. And they really burst on the scene and created a new sound. And as I was saying, were just regarded as being very revolutionary for their time. And the interesting thing about it is, while they were known for breaking the rules and being different, uh, David has said that that music came from setting rules. It came from the fact that he said all songs had to be under 3 minutes, and the subject matter, we couldn't sing about love. Songs had to be about inanimate objects, buildings, and food. And we were only able to play with a lead guitar, a bass, a drum, and a keyboardist. And we couldn't have any more instruments, and so on and so forth. Um, and by him setting those boundaries and setting those rules, he was able to work within it. It's kind of like sometimes if you're setting like a due date for yourself, that's gonna make you work towards that goal. And ultimately, what I'm trying to say there is that your creative brief or your RFP is your rules, is your boundary to work within and to be creative. And if you don't have that, the chances of success are quite slim. Number three is understanding where it will live. And you would be surprised at how much this will actually shape the creative of what you're doing, depending on what your role is within the creative. But understanding where your content, whether it's a video or a written piece or what have you, where it's ultimately going to live. And I work primarily in video. So while there's a lot of different platforms for video, the majority of what I work in is Facebook, YouTube, and broadcast. And depending on what our strategy is for the client and whether they want it on any of those platforms, that will ultimately shape, sometimes in subtle ways and sometimes in big ways, how we make the content. So some of these numbers here, might be outdated. Things are changing very quickly, but with Facebook, you know that best practices for Facebook call that video should be square. You can still do widescreen video on Facebook. There's no sin against it, but statistics on their end show that if it's within a square 640 by 640 format, it will perform better. So knowing that, okay, if I'm creating video for Facebook, I can't necessarily have subject matter in my video frame on one side all the way on the other side because they're going to be cut off. So I might want to think about center framing things because Facebook is square. Understanding that, the majority, 85% plus of people on Facebook will watch the video without sound. So knowing that, you start to think of if it's a dialogue heavy piece, okay, well, maybe I need to subtitle my spot. And Facebook actually has a pretty intuitive closed captioning tool that you can work with, or you might want to embed the subtitles hard in the video themselves. And that also might play into, well, okay, well, I was going to do graphics at the bottom of the screen, but now I can't because I know everything needs to be subtitled, so I need to change the graphical look of things. And also knowing that, the majority of people watch Facebook without sound, you might want to consider how can I tell my story visually so that regardless of anyone who's following along with the subtitles or playing it or not playing the audio, they can still get what I'm trying to say. And just more subtle things, Facebook, when people look on Facebook, they're primarily looking on their phone, so they're scrolling. And so you really need to have something to thumb stop them, as they say. You need to have visuals off the top within that first 3 seconds of your video to make them want to stop and continue watching what you have to offer. And just as a side note, Facebook counts a video view at 3 seconds, which is contrary to YouTube, which a video view is 30 seconds. So somebody actually has to stick with it for a little bit. But if you're creating for YouTube, you have a little bit more leeway with regards to the sizing of your frame. YouTube, you can go up to 4K in quality if you need to. YouTube typically says the shorter the better with regards to the content, but that doesn't necessarily mean all content should be short. we've done series of DIY videos that are 10, 15 minutes long, and they perform amazing because that subject matter calls for longer formats. But just in general, you do want to keep your content as tight as possible. I would go for quality over quantity. And with YouTube, this is more for, the targeting of it and media of it, but YouTube, you can get very specific with regards to who you want to see your videos. So if you're creating something for YouTube and just putting out on your own channels, that's one thing. But if you are buying media behind it, which pretty much every branded video out there is, it has media dollars behind it. It's not just going to be a video that goes up on YouTube and hopefully people see it. They're going to put more money, a lot more money, into making sure that people see it through media dollars. So that could be, pre-roll the 15-second ad you see beforehand, before you watch something else. But in that, you can be very highly targeted into who you're talking to. So we're working on a campaign right now where we're doing a strategy in which, we're having our creative talk about what people are going to be watching. So we know that if we put this ad before a music video on Vivo, we know that, we can have our messaging to say, hey, you're watching a music video. Same if somebody's watching a political video. We can have our creative tailored to the political genre. So YouTube will allow you to really get into that vein, which is really cool. Facebook can get you into the psyche of people, but not necessarily what they're watching. And if you are creating for broadcast, you just need to keep in mind that broadcast is kind of for a general audience. So that might help shape the language or your copy or just the overall tone. But understanding, ultimately where it will live will kind of come up with a lot of subtle differences in your creative. And here's just a little example from, this is the French version of Selfmaker. So we did this great campaign with Axe over the summer, and it was very subtle differences in our Facebook and YouTube videos. So since we knew that, Facebook was going to be a strategy, we center framed all our talent, and we center framed all of our graphics. And so you can just see kind of the subtle differences. It's very cinematic in the YouTube version, and it's very square on the Facebook version. Number 4 is ultimately what does success look like? What are the KPIs? So that's key performance indicator. And I spoke a little bit about this, that this should be known in your creative brief. This should be known in your RFP. And so success is going to be different for all clients, but it's ultimately what are they hoping to get out of the content that they're making. So for some of them, success might be clicks or sales. So it might be, people physically clicking your video and linking to their website to make sure people are buying the product. But not everything you're working for on brands is kind of sales orientated. Some of it might be brand lift or perception. So that's ultimately, making people feel good about the brand. So the campaign we worked on for Axe, which was last summer, it was very interesting because, sorry, just one second. Sorry, I got this Facebook. I'm doing a webinar right now. Oh, sorry, guys. I'm actually going to pull an audible here, and I'm going to go in a different room. This is the challenges of working in a very busy office space. Sorry about that, guys. At least you get to see a little bit of the office space. It's very dark. Sorry, so just continuing, I'll just kind of start that one over. So, so as I was saying, so one of the key things is what does success look like to the client? What is their KPI, their key performance indicator? So success is going to look different for most clients. So some of it might be very sales oriented. It's how many, is this video actually selling product? Some of it might be brand lift or brand perception, as I was mentioning before. So the campaign we worked on for Axe last summer was because Axe was going through this big branding of themselves. And they really wanted to change their perception as much as possible. So when we were doing creative for them, we knew that this was about putting a good taste in people's mouths, not necessarily trying to sell product. So the one thing that we made sure to do is we did not show the person the product, and we actually didn't show the product in the video. We showed the Axe logo many times, but we didn't show somebody in the shower gelling their hair or anything like that, because that wasn't the goal. The goal wasn't to highlight the product or to sell it. The goal was to make people feel good about Axe. And so maybe that is a KPI for the client. Other popular KPIs are awareness and impressions, making sure that people actually see whatever you're creating. And sometimes video views and completion rates are important to the client, making sure people stick with the entire video themselves. And so all these things are going to help shape the creative that you're making. So as just a couple quick examples, so we were working on a campaign for Off a couple years ago called the Get Outside Guide, and these were kind of listicle type videos, and they were, I guess the best way to put them is they were kind of hack type videos. So we would give the audience useful information, and so one video would be hiking hacks. Here's things you should do when you go out in the woods. And other videos would be like, here's signs for when you're looking for, infestations of bugs and stuff like that. So the goal of it was to try to give people useful information in a list style. But for the client, impressions and awareness were very important. They wanted to make sure that people were reminded that, off bug spray, off bug spray, off bug spray. So for us, the product actually didn't come into the video until, the second or third of our top 5 on the list. So the one thing to make sure that we hit our impressions for them is we made sure that their logo was off the top. So the very first thing you saw was that graphic that says Off presents Get Outside Guide. And then that logo was on screen at all times as a lower third. So that helped shape that, knowing that they wanted impressions. But for views and completion, so on the right is a series of videos we did recently for Merrill, which is a shoe company. And so with the one with the lady who is on high heels skating down some ice, what we ended up doing for that is the campaign was all about convincing people that winter comes fast and that they needed to buy the non-slip Arctic grip shoes that Merrill was offering. And so what our strategy for that was to be able to hit them up with a funny viral video off the top of somebody essentially you're slipping on ice, and then having the product messaging at the end. And we kept the videos very short. They were 15 seconds max. That way, we caught somebody off the top with something that was very entertaining, and then we hit them at the end with all the product messaging of the brand. So at that point, the viewer was more willing to watch it till the end and complete the video. Because if we hit them with the brand off top, most likely they might not stick with it. So understanding what success looks is going to help shape a lot of the subtle things and some of the big things, what they're making. Number 5 on the list is that insights drive creative. And there's an interesting quote here is that in 5 years, marketers will be prized for their insight, not their creativity. So insights is kind of the why are you doing what you're doing. Not only is insights going to help steer you in the right direction for coming up with a creative idea or understanding, why you're placing a graphic in a specific way, but it helps you really, it makes sense of what you're doing, and ultimately it's going to allow you to sell it to a different client. If you propose something to the client without insights, they might like it, they might not. But and Insights is actually going to allow you to win battles with clients when they might not be 100% on board with your creative idea, but if you can back it up and tell them why it's better, they're willing to take the chance on. Versus if you just go to them and say, I want to do this flashy thing without saying why, then it might get turned down. And just as a quick example here, so we were working with Paddle Canada, which is a Government of Canada sponsored program that's all about safety on water and teaching people to wear life jackets and not drown, essentially. And our studies showed that the older you get, the less likely you are to wear a life jacket. Kids wear life jackets, but as you become a teenager, you don't wear a life jacket because you don't want to look uncool. And as you're an adult, you're arrogant about it and think, well, I know how to swim, so I don't need a life jacket. So we found out that, statistically, the only people who wore life jackets were kids and kind of senior citizens. So that played into the fact that we came up with the tagline, safety never gets old. And so we were able to use it as this double entendre. So not only does, no matter your age, you're never too old to wear a life jacket, but we ended up making a series. Oh, sorry guys, I hear that, it's hard to hear. So not only were we able to use it as this double entendre of that safety never gets old, that you're never too old to wear a life jacket, but we ended up putting together a series of instructional videos that were all based in different decades. So we did a 1920s silent film, we did a 1950s Americana black and white 35mm film, we did a Technicolor film for the 1970s, and we did a hip hop rap video VHS tape for the 1980s. So if we would have proposed that idea to the client that said, hey, we want to spoof the eras of instructional videos and poke fun at ourselves, that might not have gone through. But the fact that we had the studies to the insights to support it, it was a much easier sell to get through. And this one I'm actually quite proud of because it was one of those campaigns that it was a government-funded program willing to take a risk, which is also, it's just something really cool to keep in mind that, some people are willing to go past their comfort zone. But yeah, insights should always drive why you're doing what you're doing. Don't just do it because it's cool, do it because it's number 6 on the list is to keep it simple, stupid. So I love the KISS acronym, is what that stands for. And just the thing to note is when you're working with brands, brands and clients don't necessarily, or they may not necessarily have the same creativity that you guys have. Sometimes you might envision this brand image in your head, but the client might not necessarily see it the same way that you see it. So when you're presenting to the client or try to get them on board for what you're doing, I think it's very important that you make it as clear and concise as possible so they can envision it. Just keep it super simple. And then also, when you are presenting to a client, you might want to have visuals attached with it as well, because they're not necessarily going to see it the same way you see it when you explain it. So having visuals to back it up is good. And just something that we do internally is kind of our shit test more than anything, is everything that we work with has a log line. So a logline is typically done in, film and TV. It's the one sentence descriptor of, what are you doing and what's the hook within it. And I'm a very firm believer that the best ideas and stories, even branded ones, can be told in 1 or 2 sentences. And so that also just keeps in mind for when you're coming up with creative for brands is to keep it simple, to not go too complicated, because if you can't explain it and people are confused by it, then your client's going to be confused, the audience is going to be confused. You can tell it in a sentence or two, you have the makings for something really special. And it's also Loglines, as I kind of mentioned, is a great shit indicator, to be honest, of determining whether something is good or not, whether people legitimately want to watch it. I always like to say that, at Blue Ant, we try to create content that people want to watch, not just people are forced to watch because it's an advertisement. We don't always win that battle, but when we do, it's because they have very good log lines. A great example is we did and are working with Canon for this great campaign called Rome New Roads. And Rome New Roads it's a website, and it's a platform for baby boomers to get inspired to do things now that they're retired. And we did a series of these very inspirational documentary films to support it. And each film is about a different subject of doing something different now that they're retired. And a great example of one of the log lines, and I'd be paraphrasing this. I don't know it 100% offhand, but it's, after losing mobility in half her body because of a brain tumor, Lisa, back at it, decides to take dance lessons for the first time now that she's and it was a super inspiring story about this woman taking dance lessons because she always wanted to dance, but she couldn't because of her brain tumor. And now that she was able enough, she wanted to have a recital for her friends. And it was a really inspiring, great video, and it did super well for us and was a tearjerker. Versus, we did a video for Roman Roads that the log line would have been 5 girlfriends get together for a weekend at the cottage to reminisce. And it was a cute video, but it wasn't really that entertaining or that, there was no reason for me to want to watch it because, it just wasn't that interesting. And the log line kind of sucked. And, the numbers proved that. So yeah, just my own little tangent there that, log lines I think are quite important. Whether you do it or not, but it's all just in the idea of keeping things as simple as possible. And if you guys want to know a little bit more about log lines, there's this great book called Save the Cat. Even within the first couple chapters, the amount you'll get out of it is just tenfold. It's fantastic. And then the number 7 tip is ultimately, guys, it's not your baby at the end of the day. It's very hard as a creative individual to separate yourself from the work. And, the best creative is, of course, when you become emotionally invested in it. But you need to understand at some point in time, you are a piece of the puzzle when you're working for branded stories or working for a brand. Yes, you might be a big piece of it, but, you do need to understand that at the end of the day, you're going to have to hand it over. And so within that, it's definitely important that, you step up and you bring your creative flair, everything you do, and your creative expertise. People are going to hire you because, you have a certain skill set and talent that they want to take advantage of. And that's very important. And throughout that journey, you're going to work with a lot of people and a lot of brands who might micromanage or might dictate what they want, and they just want you to do what they want. And there'll be times where you'll work with a brand and the client will have an idea for something that you don't necessarily think is right. And I don't ever suggest to just lay down and say, well, you're paying the bill, so I'll do it your way. I think you should always voice your opinion. It's also always good to get it in writing as well, and just say, with insights behind it, with the reasons behind it. You suggested this, but I really think you should do this instead, and this is why. Never just lay down and say, you're paying the checks all day the way you want it. Use your intuition, use your gut, use your expertise to make sure that, you're bringing yourself to the table. But at the end of the day, if the client doesn't want to go in that direction, they're the one to bill. So, voice it, make it known why. but at the end of the day, you're handing it over. So don't become emotionally attached to your work, but it's not your baby. Know when to check yourself with that. So that was kind of it, guys, with regards to the 7 points. I hope this was helpful. Sorry about the audio change and the change of scenery. And I guess thank you for pretending to listen, if you guys did or not. But at this point, I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys might have. As well as, feel free to always hit me up. I don't really use Twitter that much, but I'm on LinkedIn. So I'm happy to chat with anybody if you have any other questions or anything like that. So yeah, fire away. I see a lot of thank yous. Thank you, guys. Great content. You are lying. What is your LinkedIn address? So truthfully, I don't know 100% of it, but if you just search Matthew Manuge, Manuge, I'm kind of the only Matthew Manuge out there. So you will find me. Just look for the guy with the bald head. See a lot of people. Do you renegotiate rates with clients? So yes. So that's actually a very good question. Is yes, you should always renegotiate with clients or make it known. So there's going to be times when a client will brief you on something uh, and say, this is the amount of money that we have, and then halfway through it, they'll want to add more graphics, or they'll want to add a color correction, or they'll want to add so on and so forth. So setting very early on the deliverables is going to be super important for you guys. So understanding what the client is going to be getting for their money, and then if they add anything after that, then that could be an incurred cost. And it's going to be up to you whether you do that or not. I will say, when I was a freelancer, the one thing I learned very early on and the hard way was the more freebies you give for clients, the more they're going to expect that. So if you were a camera guy and you decided because you wanted to be nice to this one client, you weren't going to charge them for a camera rental fee, and normally that was in your fees. The next time they contact you, they're going to expect the camera rental fee for free. You're never going to be able to upsell them on that ever again. So be very careful on what you're willing to give them as freebies and make it very clear off the bat what they get for what they're paying. And if they go above and beyond that, and if they want more, then it's up to you guys to charge them more for it, or make it known, like, hey, if you want this graphic, happy to do it. It's going to cost you X amount more. Do you start working with clients as a freelancer? So, or did I start working with clients as a freelancer? Yes, I did start working with clients. It was kind of on the lower end. So I worked actually a lot of like publishers more than anything. I did a lot of videos for like Penguin Publishing, and I did videos for Harry Rosen and so on and so forth. How I got that work for the most part was through connections. I knew somebody who worked here, and I knew somebody who worked there, and so I did start client work before I ever started at Fluant, and that was just to kind of pay the bills. I think the hard things that you guys are going to find is is where to find the client work. It's out there. So try to make as much connections as you can with agencies, PR agencies, creative agencies, media companies, and client directs. Oftentimes, smaller clients tend to not work with an agency. They tend to do everything in-house. So that might be your guys' sweet spot. How can someone who is hoping to enter the field build their resume? What should be included in a beginner's portfolio? That's a good question. So I think depending on what you want to do within marketing, um, uh, so that's a tough one. But you know, if you're building your resume and you're trying to make connection and you're trying to learn and all that, you know, the best piece of advice I can say is just do it. Like, you know, don't ever feel like you're above anything. Actually, just go out and you know, you'll do things for free. You know, try to make as many connections as you can. Try to hit up as many companies as they want to work for, or think are cool, and try to get to know them. Try to get your foot in the door any way you possibly can. If you want to be a director or a camera guy or a filmmaker, try to get your foot in the door as a PA on, you know, brand. Find out who's doing it, and then go from there. Um, and you know, and I think that kind of goes. And luckily, you know, we live in a day now where there's LinkedIn. We live in a day where we have great programs like this one, in which you can, you know, take people out for a cup of coffee and pick their brain and get to know them and go from there. And so, if you're hoping to build your resume, yeah, just be willing to almost do any and everything that you can possibly do, and do it with a smile and do it to the best of your ability. What software do I like to use? So it depends what we're doing. So we primarily work in video. So in-house, Bluent Media is an Avid company. So we edit all on Avid. But my team works a little bit with Avid and with Premiere. Both of them work in 4K. Sometimes we use Premiere if we need to do something very quick and dirty. If something needs to be seen by a lot of people, we use Avid because Avid allows all of our systems to connect to one another. And then any graphics that we work on is all After Effects, Photoshop. And then I'm also just a big component of Google. Google Slides, Docs. When you're working with brands, so much of it is collaborative, and that's what we do. So using, you know, free stuff that Google offers and Google Drive allows you to share files and share presentations and have everybody put in their 2 cents all at the same time. So those are the softwares that we like to use here. I don't think I'm missing anything. Is there anything else that you guys have? I can't believe that you guys actually stuck with it for this long looking at this ugly mug.
I was going to jump back in, but I see that Tina has a question, so I'll let you get to that quickly, or
Yeah.
in as much time as you need.
Yeah, for sure. So the question was, any professional groups you recommend? Yeah, I'm personally a big fan of the RGD, Registered Graphic Designers. They do a conference called Design Thinkers every year, and I get so much out of that every time I go. You know, there's tons of programs out there. The part is finding the time. In terms of other professional groups, you know, I'm on certain groups on like LinkedIn. What they are, I can't really recall, to be honest. But the one that comes to mind is, yeah, the RGD, Registered Graphic Designers. They're really cool. And that's
Awesome.
just not for graphic design. Like I use it so much as a video filmmaker, director.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you so much, Matthew, for that presentation. It was a great overview. And unless there are any other questions, thank you. I'm just going to share a bit more information about our next 2 webinars before we log off. The first is on April 5th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, and that is Jason Saylaw of the Actor Fraternal Benefit Society. Anyone who's a CNG freelance member might be interested. Basically, Jason will just be talking about the affordable healthcare plan that you're eligible through your membership, and basically how you can utilize that. We'll also be posted on the website for anyone who has questions about it but can't tune in. And the next one after that is on April 11th, and that's with Jane Litvenko of BuzzFeed Canada. And Jane will be sharing tips for journalists protecting themselves online. So that's a cybersecurity presentation. And again, that's on April 11th at 3 p.m., I believe. But make sure to follow us on social media at CMG Freelance for more updates. And thank you so much for tuning in. Thanks again, Matthew.
Thank you.
Bye.